Welcome to the September 4th edition of BWI Live. I'm Greg Pickle. That's Thomas Frank Carr. T. Frank, it is Bowling Green week. Penn State 1-0 and moving up in some polls, including the SP Plus rankings after beating West Virginia on the road to open the 2024 Penn State season. T. Frank, I know you had a chance to chat with Sean and Nate on Tuesday, but I'm just curious, as we sit here now a few days away from Bowling Green, we talked before last week about what the outlook was for this Penn State team in 2024. The latest postseason projections, everyone that had Penn State out of the playoff before, which is not many people, but now they all have them back in. And of course, obviously, with the 1-0 record, Penn State is still among the favorites in the betting world to be in the playoff and also possibly win the Big Ten. So I want to get your initial thought about how Penn State comes out of that West Virginia game, and more importantly, what can we learn about it? We're going to talk a lot about that on today's show. What can we learn about it this week? Your initial thoughts.
Yeah, so I think it's largely encouraging. So the underlying things that happened in the game were all positive signs for Penn State's offense, especially this year. Defensively, I think that's where we have the most to still learn about this team, because the plan, and we'll get into this a little bit later, didn't reveal a whole lot of new from the Penn State defense. But I think offensively, there's some stuff from a one-off perspective with a 2-hour delay in the middle that changes the normal flow of a game. And
you got that right. Yeah. Not just for the players either, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, you experienced it firsthand. Like, it just disrupts the whole thing, but it did change some things from an offensive perspective. But even in that, I think Penn State, the way they went about generating explosive plays, having balance of explosiveness on the ground and through the air, and not relying on just one thing throughout the game. Like, I watched the LSU-USC game last night on replay, and LSU, like, threw the ball 24 times in the first half or something like that. Like, if you don't have, and they, Brian Kelly talked about it after halftime of wanting to run the ball and then committed to running the ball, and I think also took them out of the game in that sense of playing too much to what you needed to do to create that balance. Penn State, I think, naturally got there, and so those things are really good. Projecting that into the future is always an unknown, but we sit here after one game and say the plan worked, and so that's not only did they win, and not only was it not an upset, it wasn't necessarily super competitive. I think there were some things that are troubling, but generally, the way it played out, Penn State, I think, should feel very encouraged about the way their offense specifically played in that game.
Yeah, I think so too, T. Frank. And I feel like last year I undervalued West Virginia, and this year I actually disagree with James Franklin, who continues to call them underranked or undervalued or whatever phrase you want to use. I'm not sold on this team being as good as it was a year ago, and I'm certainly willing to be wrong. And if that's the case, I will happily admit it later this year. But I don't think that was as good of a West Virginia team as the one we saw a year ago, but Penn State still took care of business on the road despite a lengthy weather delay. I do regret to inform everyone that it's going to rain again this weekend, and now they're calling for thunder. Oh, yeah. Oh,
no,
yeah,
you're kidding.
I am not. I am certainly not. The latest weather forecast is calling for 70% chance of rain with thunder and lightning possible, and a high of 66. So
I literally wrote this week, that's a one-off situation where you're going to have a halftime delay like that.
I hope it is.
No.
I hope it is. I am with the many of you watching and listening, hoping that is the case, but time will tell. T. Frank, let's get into the week ahead. Penn State is a 34.5-point favorite as we sit here and look ahead to Bowling Green, point favorite in this game. And so I think the question is going to be not so much the outcome, because I think we know the outcome, but how Penn State gets there. And some players that we will probably get to see a lot of just based on the way this game is likely to play out. Penn State in the past. Penn State, number one, I guess let's start here. Were you surprised how many guys Penn State rotated in, especially on defense in the first half? And it was more so, they did so in the second half, but there was also the blowout aspect of it. But to me, I was impressed by how many guys Penn State played. It was hot, and it was like on the field at West Virginia. Before the weather delay, it was probably real feel over 100. It was hot. And so I know that was part of that rotation plan, but they got a lot of guys in, especially early against the Mountaineers.
It was strategic in a couple of different ways, and I got to give credit to Sean Fitz, who was there and saw this stuff, that they were also using it as a way to slow down West Virginia, it seems, so that they couldn't take advantage of the heat and tempo to get those guys tired out early in the game. So if they substituted, meaning West Virginia, then Penn State also substituted, and they ran through those guys in terms of, because it was hard to track of like, okay, now it's Alonzo Ford, now it's Keziah Izzard, especially at linebacker and defensive tackle. They were running in waves where you didn't know if it was Dom DeLuca or if it was Jalen Reed out there, and from the TV copy, they're showing replays and close-ups, and I think the most useless thing for me in football is the close-up during a football game. I don't care. Yeah. I don't care. Right. Show me the formation. Show me what's going on. I know I'm a super nerd, and my guy Landon Tangwell, also a super nerd in here. He says, let me on the show. We'll have 3 guys with buzz cuts. Greg, we got to get him on the show next week after Bowling Green for the bye. That'll be a good one.
We can make that happen.
Because I know you and Landon also have a relation going back to when he was a recruit, right?
Yes. Yep. Yes, we should make that happen. A good bye week show, because
that'll be a good substitution.
Bowling Green, a Sunday film study on reviewing Bowling Green is going to be tough, D. Frank. I'm not sure we can make a whole show out of that.
Luckily, I think it'll be a little bit briefer. Well, here's the problem, because then it's like, okay, now we got to get into the details of everyone's going to be like, well, how did X look? How did the third string right guard who's a freshman look like? Or how did Egan Boyer, Garrett Sexton, if they get into the game? So like, as much as it does seem like that, everyone wants to know about the young guys. But I think, speaking of substitutions, it'll be a good bye week substitution to get another big body here on the show to lighten the load for that bye week. But yeah, that substitution process in the game early on, and then later in the game, it seems like from the third quarter especially, they didn't do as much of that because the storm had literally passed.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think that once Penn State came out, they had a great plan. They had a really great plan to come out of that lengthy delay, 2 hours and 19 minutes, and take advantage of the opportunities they had with getting the first kickoff of the second half. West Virginia, I was surprised when they took the ball, when they won the coin toss. And I'm sure they did not expect to have Penn State get a 2 hour and 19-minute chance to figure out their first drive of the second half when they decided to do that. But certainly Penn State had a good plan, took advantage of the opportunity, and did not repeat the issues that were in 2017's weather delay at Michigan State. Looking ahead to Bowling Green, T. Frank, let's get into it. The players we're watching on Saturday. As you know, Penn State will have a number of young players play in this game. How soon they get on the field, we're going to have to wait and see. But all told, T. Frank, let's open the bidding with a player that we did not see on the field Saturday at West Virginia, but he was on the travel roster. It's quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer, the third stringer, because of the fact that Jackson Smolik is hurt. He also traveled, but he is not in the mix for Penn State to be on the field at the moment. When he gets on the field, assuming he does, and we assume that he will, what do you want to see from him and his debut as a Nittany Lion?
Simple, clean processing, decision-making. I think that's something he's very good at. We only got brief glimpses of it during the blue-white game, but I was impressed with some of the plays that he had. Everything he does is quick. I just love that. His release is quick. His footwork is quick. He's a naturally twitchy player for somebody who athletically is good. He fits this offense really well from an RPO perspective, from a run perspective. He's going to get bigger and stronger, and all those things are going to accentuate, but it's the decision-making I want to see. I want to see some clean football and some clean completions for him, because some of the things Drew Aller does from a mental aspect of being able to get to his backside progression, finding the right guy within the system and within the framework of what the defense is giving you, he does similar things, but, and this is no disrespect to Drew, Ethan's naturally more accurate, and it's not natural because he's worked on it, but he is more inclined to be able to flip his hips, turn this way, and deliver the ball on target the first time. And that's something where Drew kind of works his way into a rhythm. It feels like, from what I've seen of Ethan, he gets into a rhythm very quickly. So I want to see all those things from him. I want to confirm that is, in fact, the case, because I'm very high on his future at Penn State because of those things.
Yeah, you and me both. And I think the other thing that's important to remember is Penn State, if it ever gets to a point where it has to play Ethan Grunkemeyer consistently, something's going horribly wrong. And it's very unlikely that Penn State will win many games if it gets to that point anyway. But it does need to be recognized that he is the number 3 quarterback, and he is in the unfortunate situation of 2 injuries to Drew Aller and Bo Perbola, the next man up. And so what does he look like? How ready and poised is he for game day? And I think we should definitely get a chance to see that. For anyone who's listening as we go through these guys, it is important to note when we're talking about freshmen, but just anybody else, 4 games in the regular season. If you play in 4 or less, you can preserve a year of eligibility, and the postseason does not count against that counter. So you can play in every playoff game, and as long as you played in just 4 or less regular season games, you can keep a year of eligibility. It doesn't seem, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me like that just matters as much anymore. And I know there's talk out there about the NCAA maybe just going to 5 years, just getting rid of the redshirt rule and saying you have 5 years, and 5 years is 5 years. So we'll see, but. To me, it does not seem like as much of a concern in 2024 as it was in the past.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I see it both ways in that James Franklin is deadly serious about the red shirt situation with some of the freshmen, especially a running back. So, and to kind of bring up another player in another situation, do we see Quinton Martin and Corey Smith? Do we see one of them in this game? He talked about having basically one red shirt for both of those guys. So do they both get play in this game, or do they save something for Quinton or for Corey down the road for November? No disrespect to the teams at the end of the schedule, but Minnesota and Maryland, I think it is, are the two in the final 2 weeks of the season. That might factor into getting guys fresh, getting guys not a lot of load on them towards if they're pushing for a postseason berth and making sure everyone's healthy. Blah blah blah. That might even be strategic from that perspective where you need to play both of those guys. So how do they work this game? Or is this one where they both get to play? Because they didn't against West Virginia in the blowout. Only Cam Wallace got into the game in the 4th quarter. So that's going to be, just from that perspective, I find interesting of illuminating what the plan is for those guys. Because it does matter and it doesn't. They'll burn it whenever they need it, but they want to keep it if they can.
Yeah, I think we'll see one of them against Bowling Green and one of them against Kent State, and that way you get each of them the proverbial cliche of getting their feet wet, but you only use one game for each guy. So I'm assuming we'll see one of them this week and then one of them in 2 weeks after the bye. It just came up in the chat, so we'll just put that up and don't we? Yeah, so I think it's going to be 1-1, T. Frank. I do. I think we'll see one of them. I think we'll see one of them against Bowling Green and the other one against Kent State. So next up on our list of players we're looking forward to this weekend, we're going to stay on offense. And I agree with you 100%. You put this name on the list, but Luke Reynolds looks fantastic. He was on the travel roster to West Virginia, played 12 snaps with Khalil Dinkins sidelined. We knew that Andrew Rapplier and Luke Reynolds were both going to play. He held his own, T. Frank. He is ready to roll. I'm not sure if he ends up on a trajectory similar to Rapplier, where we thought he could maybe play last year, but ended up preserving that red shirt. I'm going to guess that probably is not the case, but time will tell. And he certainly, whatever time he gets, he's going to be ready for it.
It all depends on where Khalil Dinkins is in his return to play, but in this particular situation, if there's any question, don't rush him back, because you have the depth in the room where Joey Schlaffer didn't have a chance to play this past weekend. So that's another guy you can play extensive snaps in this game if you wanted to preserve Luke Reynolds' red shirt. I'll say this. I think that he held his own as a blocker in terms of effort and being on the field and not giving up bad plays. But when you go into and you watch some of the film, there's some freshmanness there. So I'd like to see him against some competition. I don't want to say more his level, but, a non-conference opponent that isn't a Power 5 opponent for a true freshman run blocker who's still growing into his body. So the good news is the effort is there. The execution needs to get better, but that's part of the process, right? So does the execution get a little bit better this week where when guys try to, shoot a gap on him, he's able to get in front of them and wall that off for the running backs. So just progress from Luke Reynolds from week 1 to week 2 and get to see him do a little bit more. He got one target that was a tough throw from Drew Aller out into the flat on a play where there was immediate pressure because West Virginia, I think, sent 5 on that play, and there was some unblocked pressure on a play action. So I want to see him have the ball in his hands at some point, because that's the thing with Luke Reynolds. He is an amazing athletic down the field receiver with great contested catch ability, jumping ability. I want to see any of that. If Luke Reynolds and Ethan Grunkemeyer get a chance to connect in this game, that's going to be a fun and exciting preview maybe of the future for the Nittany Lions, because that's an aspect in this offense I think Andy Kotelnicki can take advantage of with that type of player in his system.
Yeah, a couple things in the chat. Matt and Corey, we did not get to those guys you're looking for yet, so they are coming up on this edition of the BWI Live Show. To this point here from Eggman about the tight end room being stacked, why would you burn the red shirt? I just think that you can say it's stacked and you're not wrong, but if Dinkins is going to be out, and we know Penn State has pretty much historically, traditionally played 3 tight ends in the James Franklin era, you're pretty much down to Luke Reynolds at this point. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Jerry Cross is there. Joey Schaffler's still there. And both Cross did not make the trip. Or I'm sorry, they both did make the trip, but Cross was out. So, yeah, I just think at this point, Luke Reynolds, if he is everything Penn State thinks he is, and if he is everything that his profile looks like he could be, he probably is not a 4 or 5 year guy anyway. So right. Rappleyea is going to continue to get the majority of the reps behind Tyler Warren with Dinkins out. But if Dinkins misses extended time, which we don't know exactly what the status of his injury is at this moment, you're going to see a lot of Luke Reynolds. And I think that this game, T. Frank, to your point, will be another opportunity for him to put some good stuff on film and more learning experiences. And here's the thing. If you don't need him in October, November, and you can preserve a red shirt, great. But Penn State under James Franklin has proved pretty willing to burn red shirts when they need to. And Greg, this could be a case where he needs to.
Was Jerry Cross officially listed as out? I believe I saw that from you guys. Was he on like an injury or non-participation list for the game against West Virginia? Or did he just not play?
I'm going to pull that up and just verify because honestly, I don't remember.
Okay. Because I think that's a part of this. Yeah, yes. I think that's a part of it because we saw Jerry Cross practice. He's been in and out his entire career at Penn State, but specifically the spring he missed, and then he's been in and out periodically, over the time since then. And so, is he healthy? And he
was listed as out. He was listed as out, as was Dinkins. Yep.
Yeah, so I guess that's the question is, has Luke Reynolds leapfrogged Jerry Cross, or do they just need him because they've got 2 players that are injured there? That's, to me, what is going to determine Luke Reynolds' redshirt, because I think even then, I do think James Franklin would preserve it if he wants. Again, all of these things are, in a perfect world, you get 4 games out of all of these guys plus a postseason, and you get your cake, you get your cake, and you get to eat it too. So that's always the goal, is having everything, but they'll burn it the minute they need it, and so far they need it. And that's going to be the question: is does that continue and go forward as they need him in the lineup? Because we still don't know what the situation is with Khalil Dinkins, because it's all under bumps and bruises.
Right, and I think we could learn a little bit more about that tonight at practice. We'll get into a practice preview here in a little bit on the BWI Live Show. But speaking of red shirts and burning red shirts, a guy who will burn his red shirt is safety DeJuan Lane. He traveled with Penn State, was a big part of the special teams, got a little bit of safety work. Any takeaways from his first time out on the field as a Nittany Lion team?
He's fast. I mean, we knew that. We knew he was fast, but damn, is he fast. So, it was the end of the game, and it's obvious run situations. West Virginia's probably not going to pull and throw a pass down, 20 points or whatever at that point, or more than 2 scores. So it was honorable defeat time, and DeJuan Lane is filling from free safety, and I just, in a blink of an eye, he's down in the alley.
Right.
All the instincts and all those things we have to see, is he a good tackler? There were some things from high school where I wanted to see more physicality from him. He's big enough to be an intimidator. He can be the biggest safety. Even, I think, what is he? I think he might be listed at 210 or something right now. And that's crazy because that means he's bigger than all of Penn State safeties right now and is one of the faster players. So he could be like a complete safety in a KJ Winston mold. He just has to work on all of the things to get there. And so it's just fun to watch that. It's fun to watch fast, explosive, big people run around the field. He can be a highlight machine. So in this game, if he shows you some highlights, that's exciting.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I'll be very curious to see. Penn State obviously has 3 very good safeties in front of him, so he is going to see most of his time on special teams. But certainly when he gets a chance in games like this one to be in the secondary, I would expect him to impress. A couple of things from the chat, T. Frank. Steven asks, did any young D lineman get any run, redshirt freshman or freshman? No, not really.
Ty Blanding got in the end of the game against West Virginia,
yes.
but it was like 2 plays.
Yeah, and so the one thing I would say about that is, and this is going a little bit off the rundown, T. Frank, so excuse me for that, but I think that it's a reminder that Penn State did return a lot of guys on the interior. Kazai Izzard, Hakeem Beamon, Devon Ellies. I mean, obviously Zane Durant's back. He's not as old as those guys, but I don't think you need to go all that deep on off their defensive line depth chart in a game like that one, because you have so many guys back, and even though these guys, Devon J. Thomas and Kazai Izzard and Hakeem Beamon, they're not necessarily all Big Ten players yet, but they're still highly productive guys who all came back for an extra season. Yeah. And we saw that on Saturday, where Penn State did not have to go deep down into the depth chart because of that.
Yeah, and also Mason Robinson was out of the game as well, I believe.
He was also out, yes.
Yep. Yeah, so they're not going to play Max Granville in the first game. We might get to him in this conversation. We might not get to him in this conversation. I think the best thing for him is just to focus on getting bigger and getting stronger and, delivering on all of that talent. But then you got the other ones are just, I think it's just Vicky McCoy and and Mason Robinson. The other true freshmen, defensive ends, we might get to see them in this game. But there wasn't really a need to put him out on the field, especially when you want to get as many snaps as possible for those defensive ends, because you go 4 deep. And if Abdul Carter's playing a lot in the first half, you still want to get Amin Vanover and you still want to get Smith-Vilbert exposure, because Smith-Vilbert comes into the game against the backup left tackle, has a highlight that's gone viral on the internet, and suddenly we're talking about Smith-Vilbert. That's good for him. That's good for Penn State. You don't want to put a freshman out there to just absorb snaps if you have the opportunity to develop and work on some of these guys down the depth chart at DN when you need to get them up to speed. You need to get the most out of those 4 because you're going to play them all year.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. All right, Corey, in the chat, we have reached the point of the show you have been waiting for. Moving on in our list of players, young guys who could see time this week. Tysier Denmark on the travel roster did not play at West Virginia. I would be very surprised if he does not get at least some run in this game against Bowling Green, considering what the score should be, and also considering, at least in my opinion, Penn State needs to see what it has with him in pads on the game field. If he's earned it, which if he hasn't earned it, that's his own problem, right? Because if Penn State does not feel like it should put him on the field in a game, that means he has not been doing his job in practice. So very curious to see where he stands at this point. It could mean that, right? Yeah,
he's not a big dude, and I know that I've probably been on the negative side of Tysier Denmark hype, and that's just I'm just always the wet blanket. I'm always the dude that's like, hey guys, let's calm down on the guy who's 5'11", 170 pounds. He's not going to come in and save the team, especially because he doesn't have like the hype. I felt like in the recruiting process, the hype overmatched what he ended up becoming, which is not to say
how bad the receivers room is, T. Frank. That's right. How bad the perception of the receiver. Let me put it this way: how bad the perception of the receivers room is. Right? Anyone could have been a savior for that room.
And so again, I'm coming off negative on Tysier Denmark, and I don't intend to be. I just mean that I don't know that anything he does in practice is going to change the fact that he needs a year in the weight room. So he can be productive, he can help, he can all of these things in the non-conference games. But if you're thinking down the road, let's say they need him against Ohio State. If that's the case, they're in trouble. I don't think there's anything that Tysier can do between then and now to change those things, because it literally takes time. There's no shortcuts other than steroids, which are illegal to develop quickly enough to get to that point. And I don't think even if like that, let's go extreme case scenario, maybe I'm overstating this, but I just have a hard time thinking by October he's going to be physically mature enough to the point that he's ready to go. And that's understanding that he is on from a game perspective. He is a very advanced football player. So I guess there has always been a ceiling to the Tysier Denmark conversation because of those things in my mind. And he can prove me wrong, but that is going to take some time. to do that. And even in a game against Bowling Green, I don't know that that's going to translate to Big Ten play. And so, yes, seeing the future, seeing all these guys play this weekend, I always get nervous because then we see Tysier Denmark get, let's say he gets 50 yards receiving, and suddenly it's like, well, why isn't he playing? And there are reasons. There are reasons why he's not playing, and I think that they are. I don't know that they're going to change just with more playing time. But again, I can always be wrong. T. Frank, like that's always an option on the table. T. Frank is wrong about that, and we'll see.
Yeah, so he was a little bit more physically impressive. I was down on the field before the game at West Virginia. He was a little bit more physically impressive than I expected in pass.
Okay.
For whatever that's worth.
That's good to know.
You make a good point that that was always going to be the question mark when Tysier Denmark obviously did not enroll early. He was a guy who came to Penn State this summer, so he did not have time to. No, Native's never wrong. That is correct. He did not have the chance to go through winter workouts, and so that was always going to be a factor in how soon he would get to the field. So, very curious to see what he does this week. I think you make a great point, T. Frank. We'll see how that works out. Question here: do we know anything about Liam Andrews rehabbing? No, not at the moment. Go ahead, T. Frank.
I was just gonna say, like, I've probably overcorrected because this is something I always do. I always overcorrect to the groundswell of something that I think is. I'm just in wait and see mode for Tysier. I am not in full steam ahead like I am for some of the other players in this class. I'm more in wait and see. I want to see some more things from Tysier from that perspective before I'm ready to say that he's going to contribute, because things we're going to get to here later in the show. They may need that. They may need him if he's ready, but I'm just in wait and see mode, as opposed to, get him on the field. Any opportunity that he can prove it is evidence that he's ready. I'm just more hesitant about that. That's all.
Well, if you are ready to join us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, we have a promo running right now just for you. It's the best deal you're going to get. $1 for 2 months of access to Blue White Illustrated, the latest team news, recruiting intel, and much more. It's code PSU1 for 1 month, or I'm sorry, $1 for 2 months of access to our premium coverage at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Thank you for being here with us on the YouTube channel, or if you're listening on the podcast, thank you for that as well. Please remember, like, subscribe, leave us some feedback. We appreciate it. T. Frank, next up on our list of players who we could see this week, and maybe we will, maybe we won't, but Max Granville. Yep. Defensive end who should still be in high school, was on the travel roster for Penn State at West Virginia. And he just continues to have buzz about him. Like, we were standing there, what was this, probably 3 weeks ago now, when Dennis Sutton called him Chop 2.0, obviously referring to Chop Robinson. I'm standing there, I'm thinking, man, that's high praise.
Right.
And I was
he's not crazy.
I was a little bit leery of pushing that too much because at some point, again, he can be as advanced as he wants to be, but he's still a guy who should still be in high school. And came to Penn State the day that camp started. So I've been trying to not go too far down the hype train, so to speak. But I think we could see him this weekend, and if we do, I think Penn State fans could be pleasantly surprised by what they see.
Yeah, copy and paste the whole conversation about Tysier Denmark here is like, even if you see him and he does something really great, like be excited for 2025 because 235 pound, maybe he's 240. Like his goal was to get to like 245 by next year. I interviewed him here on the show the day before he started class, and that was his goal. Even Max was talking about, I'm here to grow physically and mentally in the game so that in 2025 I'm ready to play. But from a tools perspective, I think is what Nittany was talking about, of twitch off the ball, explosiveness, and ability to bend the corner. Yeah. He's all of that, plus he loves to hit. And so the physicality he plays a little bigger than he is because of that. He just needs to get bigger so that means he's playing at or above competition instead of at or below competition level in terms of his strength and his play strength. I'm excited. I'm very excited for Max Granville. I think he is a massive addition to this team, and joining now when he did makes 2025 a better prospect for reloading in the certain sense of the word of assuming that a lot of these defensive ends are moving on. The talent will be there. It's just all about, can he make the physical growth between then and now to pay all of it off? But he's got the mentality to do it. His dad's a former NFL player. He understands strength and conditioning to the point that he enrolled early for it. And so I think the maturity He was geeking out about the cold tub. So all these things are great. But if you see him this weekend, be excited for 25, not for, who knows, maybe the playoff. I don't know how far they go down the road this year.
Yeah, no, it's a good point because I do think that we are going to see some guys both in this game and also against Kent State in 2 weeks that you could see pop up in the playoff. And that's the fascinating thing when we talk about, like I posted yesterday at BlueIllustrated.com, the postseason projections, and I said earlier that everyone has Penn State in. But when you think about those matchups, you also have to remember that anyone that gets in could have a much different look based on who they were saving from a eligibility standpoint that they can now use in the playoff. So we're talking about some of these guys who you may see show up only maybe in September or at maybe one other point of the year could really change things once the playoff comes if Penn State qualifies. We are going to roll into the practice preview. T. Frank, Penn State will have practice open for reporters tonight. You can also come right back here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel this evening to see James Franklin's latest news conference from Haluba Hall. I'm just going to do this on the fly because I'm reading your notes as you type, and we'll see how we do this. But Julian Fleming is a guy we want to get a look at both this weekend and at practice tonight. James Franklin, extremely complimentary of him on Monday during his news conference, noting that Julian Fleming may not have had any stats on the box score, but he obviously played a role in James Franklin's opinion, and you can see it on the tape if you go back and watch it. 2 different Nittany Lion touchdowns. So there is something he brings to that receivers room, and on a week in and week out basis, T. Frank, it may not show up in the box score, but I think it's going to show up for other players in the box score at the very least. Yeah,
and I wrote about this last night at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can go check that out for the $1 deal. But there was also another layer to Fleming and his participation in that game. We're going to set it up with some context clues here. James Franklin talked about the receiver room during his weekly press conference on Monday.
And then I think your question about the other wide receivers, again, I thought the group played well. We had some other bumps and bruises as well that I think we're through now. But we'd like to get as many guys involved because I think, one of the things when you talk about balance, is not really the ability to be 50% run, 50% pass in a game. It's having the ability to run or pass in any given situation, but also like Mike Leach, talked about, balance is also ball distribution.
So the context clues here. Let's put some puzzle pieces together. First off, we know Caden Saunders wasn't healthy. James Franklin talked about it in the comments before that clip. They didn't know if he was going to play. He was there just to shag punts. Secondly, Liam Clifford was not at practice 2 weeks ago during the final week of training camp before they transitioned into West Virginia prep. He was back, but then played 21 snaps and only 3 on passing downs. So let's use our detective brains and say Liam Clifford, the team's number 2 receiver, throughout the spring and the summer and fall camp, did not get a target and only was on the field for 3 passing plays. When we're talking about bumps and bruises, other bumps and bruises, I think it was Liam Clifford. So both of your slot options are now out of the game, essentially. And so I went through some of the play level data and tried to understand, okay, so Julian Fleming, not only is he a certain specific skill player that is no longer the 5-star that enrolled at Ohio State from a talent perspective, which we have to remind people still. There are people that are just tuning in. We have like 500 new subscribers in the last week and a half at Blue White Illustrated here on the YouTube channel. So we need to reinforce and reemphasize that. But he's also playing in the slot in this game. Of the players they chose to replace those guys, they went with the veteran who they felt like they could trust. Right. And so that's not his game. Lateral separation, quickness, explosiveness in and out of his breaks. He's a good route runner. He's a fluid route runner. He is not dynamic in that sense. So he's set up to not succeed because the team needed him to block and to run guys off of other players, which we saw him do in the game. That's why, you're getting an extreme complimentary performance for a 0-catch game from James Franklin and from the rest of the coaching staff, because I'm not going to say he took one for the team, but he kind of took one from the team. What he's good at is running under soft coverage, 10 yards down the field, turning around, catching the football, deep ends, zone busters, things like that, and he's not in a situation to do that as easily against the middle of the field where it's a little more crowded and you need to do some things to get open. So he was not in position to make the catches necessarily that he would get. And most of the time he was on the field, they had him running on passing plays from that slot position. So not just he was in and out of the lineup and run plays outside inside, but he was also primarily the meat of his work on passing plays was in the slot, because Amari Evans, that's not his game, and they wanted that speed on the outside, which you saw why in that game. So that's the whole context between what we're looking for at practice tonight, bumps and bruises of the receivers, who's back, who's practicing, and where. You know, is it because, you know, some of the things we don't talk about necessarily here on the show. I saw Fleming when they said, hey, we want our slot receivers. I saw Fleming line up there, and I immediately went, okay, that's interesting. But of course, like, you know, no, we don't talk about the things that are going to directly involve game plan stuff during the show or anything like that, because that, you know, that's what's the word I'm looking for? You know, house rules are like
yes, it's against
kosher.
It's
Thank
against
you.
the house rules. Yes.
Yeah. It's impolite to do those things because you don't want to influence anything that happens on the field. But that is something that I'm going to be looking for this weekend or today, and then going forward. So that, to me, wide receiver rotation, Julian Fleming, health, it all comes together in that, as opposed to, you know, just the players that are healthy and out there and who's running through drills first.
Who could have predicted it, T. Frank? In week 2 of the college football season, we'd be talking about the Penn State wide receivers room. Hard to believe.
And they had a good game.
Yes, they did. They did. Hey, one quick note before we get into the rest of this practice preview. Over on the Blue White Illustrated message board, I just posted a link. Jalen Reed is up for the Lot Impact Player of the Week award, and it's a fan vote part of it. So if you want to vote for him, you have until noon to do so. You can find that over in the Bowling Green thread on the Lions Den message board. Another thing at practice tonight, T. Frank, is, and it's actually interesting to me before we get to that Jalen Reed is finally up for an award, because KJ Winston has been gobbling up awards so far this week, and I thought Jalen Reed actually had a better game. Not that KJ Winston had a bad game, but
but he had 12 tackles, and
and
that's how that works. That's how that works.
It is. You are correct. Another thing for practice tonight, offensive line rotation. I know that's something you're going to be keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, so I actually want to get to the defense tonight, but just the way everyone is crazy about the offense and all the Andy Kotelnicki stuff, probably will end up with the offense again. But the offensive line rotations, where guys are lining up right now, how all of that's working. I'm just always fascinated because there are some moving pieces, and who's lining up at left tackle, who's getting reps at guard, is anybody getting reps at center, that kind of stuff. Like, that is, if there's a week to move guys around, if there's a time to move guys around during the season, it's this 3-week stretch to get them the extra work, maybe to get them comfortable at a new position. I'm thinking specifically of Javen Williams, somebody who they might want to put in at guard at some point this year, because that might be where he's best.
To guard. He has not officially switched to guard.
No, because we saw him at left tackle. Like, you know, we saw he was the backup left tackle once the game was over and they put in the backups.
Let's agree with Ryan here. Please do like and subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel if you have not already. We appreciate all 183 of you now joining us here live on the BWI Live Show. So the offensive line, a couple thoughts from me. The first one being, how much does Cooper Cousins play this week? And that we're not going to necessarily learn that at practice, but we know he's going to play. He had a role on special team. Like, he's funny, man. Like, for being a freshman, he does not come off as a freshman on the field. Like, he is a mean dude in the right way, I think is the way to put it. Like, there was no hesitation, right?
No, so there was no hesitation in any of his assignments.
He wants to block you. He wants to hit you, and he has no problem doing it. So I'm curious to see how much he plays this week. And then we didn't see as much Nolan Rucci as I thought we would against West Virginia. And so I'm curious to see, that was supposed to be a rotation, was the understanding, or the way it was described. And it was not really a rotation, T. Frank. It was Anthony Donko's job, and Nolan Rucci got to play a little bit later in the game. So curious to see if that changes this week.
Yeah, and I thought Nolan was good when he came into the game. So his strength is run blocking. He is a people mover, and he showed that. Like, There were a couple of guys that had standout run blocking performances. We'll get to them in just a little bit, but an underrated one was Nolan Rucci came in, and there were some hints of it. We got to see him in the bowl game. Going back to high school, that's been his thing. At 6'8", his pad level and his ability to generate leverage makes him a difference maker as a run blocker, and that came through when all you're doing is run blocking. His issue, ironically, for being a 5-star and being pretty athletic, was balance and pass protection, and so... I want to see him pass block this game. I think how he plays on that perspective, because I do think they'll rotate more in this game. That's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, me too. I just don't know if Penn State gets a lead. That's the only problem you run into in these kind of games, is that it becomes a lot of running, especially after halftime.
Yeah,
and you don't always get to see everything you hope to. So, you got one thing?
Just one last thing on the offensive line.
Yep.
Their plan at guard I find interesting because they played Vega at both right and left guard to take some of the snaps off of Sal Wormley. And so JB Nelson, that's when he inserted in at left guard.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the plan throughout the year, or does Cooper Cousins start to get more of that role at that right guard position as the primary backup to Sal Wormley? That's what we've seen all of camp, both spring and fall. So does he take over that role, or do they continue to play Venga at basically all three interior spots at some point? I'm just curious about that's part of the O-line rotation that is notable going into week 2.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that as well. Speaking of things we're interested in, T. Frank, James Franklin, as we mentioned, will speak to reporters tonight. Again, you can come back and watch that here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. It should be up by around, let's call it 7:30 Eastern time, just for that chance it runs late, which it sometimes does.
Just depends on the Wi-Fi. And my computer is garbage, so it takes some time. At times when I'm sitting on Haluba Hall floor over by the water fountain trying to get the video up for everybody.
He does have a good setup, folks. You got to give him credit for that. He has a good setup. We'll have to get a photo of that next time and put it up on the show. What are you most interested to hear from James Franklin? I have a couple things I'm hoping we hear about, but
I'm more interested. You're the journalist here. You're the guy who reports on stuff.
My question.
I want to know what
Monday,
you want to know.
Yeah. My question going back to Monday is: does Penn State? This was the headline of the weekly rundown. But does Penn State have a kicker it can trust? Is this kicking battle over? Is it ongoing going into this week? James Franklin said Monday that he believes they have confidence in Sanders Sahadak, and he believes he'll make the next one after missing a 47-yarder. I have questions about if he is the best option for Penn State. Does Penn State have a kicking problem because of that?
Mm-hmm.
And that right hash is clearly a problem for him. It has been his entire career. And we heard a lot of good things about Ryan Barker, and Chase Meyer came in from Tulsa to battle for that job. And the things that can derail a team from making or not making the college football playoff, or making a run in the college football playoff, is kicking. And by and large, Penn State has been very good in that department in the James Franklin era. And I don't know, T. Frank, I'm just very curious to hear, is that job settled? And if it is, was Sanders Sahadak so good in practice that there is reason to give him wiggle room on game day? Or are they going to continue, a battle? And will we see multiple guys kick against Bowling Green?
Yeah, so I talked about this on the post-game show, I think it was, where they framed it. Mech Engineer, appreciate you being here, my guy. James Franklin talked about the 2-point conversion being
to get Bo in. Yeah.
To get Bo in. Okay. All right. I believe that. But is the design of wanting to get those short yardage plays up to speed because you don't necessarily believe in your kicker?
Right. Yeah.
Right. There's another half of that thought potentially.
Right.
And so, I think that we may see a more aggressive team. We've seen it in the past where James Franklin does not trust the kicker from length, from 40 plus. They will go for it in those areas. It's not just about the teams want to be analytically aggressive. It's also about what's the percentage of us hitting those field goals. And James Franklin talked about, he was I was surprised he gave these stats when he talked about the kicking competition. I think it was either the last press conference before West Virginia or the one before that where he said it's not like the competition was so wide. It was like 84, 83, 81 or something like that in terms of, I don't remember, but it was the low 80s in terms of accuracy over camp. I don't know what is typical of their kickers. So that might be right in line with all the kickers that have been successful. But 80, the highest number seemed low to me, where you would want that to be closer to 90% accuracy. Again, college kicking is different than NFL kicking. I don't do any analysis here because it is mysticism understanding kicking to me. So I don't know, but I think those are all, to me, worrying things that in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I don't trust the situation right now. As I sit here and look at this team coming out of West Virginia, a lot of the questions I had were answered in a positive way. The kicking one was not. And I just think that's something Penn State will need to continue to develop. But I'm curious to see if James Franklin is asked about that and discusses that tonight. Another thing that's going to come up, and you hit on it just a little bit ago, but the bumps and bruises situation. I would expect we will hear James Franklin ask about Khalil Dinkin's status, about Liam Clifford's status, and see where those guys are heading into Bowling Green week. And he's not going to give any definitive answer. I would be surprised. But we will hear, I guess, a little bit about where those guys are. And then just beyond that, T. Frank, I'm curious, like, it came up yesterday and it will probably come up again tonight, but it's a weird week because you play Bowling Green, then you have a bye in the second week of September rather, which is certainly strange. But I just wonder if James Franklin said Monday it's business as usual this week, and it just makes me wonder a little bit if it's not. If you can do some different things in practice this week that you normally wouldn't do, knowing you have a MAC opponent and then a bye.
So that is, I think, is he a little bit looser with his conversation about injuries because of all of those things going forward? And he hasn't said any of these guys are out for a long extended period of time. So if they're going to be back by Illinois and they just don't need to play in the next 2 weeks, does he have a conversation a little bit more in depth about those things? That's the only thing. I think on principle, he just does not want to talk about it ever. And also the latitude, if he opens the door a crack, people are going to try and shove their way through it because the door is closed and we still are trying to bang the door down on the injury conversation from a media perspective. So that dynamic I do think is interesting from the conversation around the injuries and the bumps and bruises.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, let's get into some film review from the week that was. I think we have a graphic for this, but I'm having trouble finding it at the moment, T. Frank. Yes.
I got you.
But there we go. Perfect. So Penn State obviously wins over West Virginia as covers the spread. That we're still trying to figure out why that spread dropped to 7.5, but it worked out for Penn State, obviously. And let's dive into it here. The things you learned, didn't learn, saw and didn't see after both watching the game and then watching the film review.
So I have talked all offseason about how much I like Tom Allen's coverage plans and how much I like his design on the back end. And we saw none of it against West Virginia. Their plan was, and people, didn't have to. Like they played basically they played 3 coverages in the game. They played cover 2 on third down. They played cover 1 and smothered. That means tight man coverage, press man coverage against West Virginia and smothered their receivers. People keep asking me about what did you see of the Penn State corners? What did you see of the Penn State corners? I'm like, you didn't see them because they did their job and there was nowhere to throw the football. One of the only open throws of the game was Zakee Wheatley against a wide receiver, which they were confident enough to put their safeties in any position, which is something that I found very interesting where, Jalen Reed is the lion position, and he talked about with Nate Bauer how he's not a linebacker. He'll play it underneath coverage. He'll be the guy in the slot. He'll have some run fits, but he lined up at free safety. He lined up in the box. He lined up in the slot. He lined up everywhere. But so did KJ Winston and so did Zakee Wheatley, where they use those guys interchangeably. That makes it very hard, eventually, when they do run some of these coverages, to diagnose who's the free, who's the strong, who's the nickel, because any of them can play any of those. And in a lot of these defenses, what they do is they make an umbrella out of those players, and they just shift it left and right based on the coverage. And when you can do that uniformly and without having to worry about matchup advantages, there will be times, watching USC and Zachariah Smith or whatever his last name is, oh my gosh, that guy's fast. They won't be able to do it against everybody, but against most teams, those guys can play interchangeably. But they just didn't need to do anything from a scheme perspective with Tom Allen. And so that's something we're not going to see again this week, but I still want to see eventually, because what they decided was we're going to stop the run and we're going to smother the West Virginia offense, and they never deviate from that plan.
Thoughts on Andy Kotelnicki? Let's go to the other side of the ball, T. Frank.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think everyone was impressed by what Penn State did defensively against West Virginia. James Franklin, and I think with a good reason, felt a need to point out all the things they did well on defense at his Monday news conference to kick things off.
Yeah.
I did feel like the defense was probably a little bit underrated coming out of that game. I also think West Virginia, like Neil Brown said it best, the West Virginia head coach, like their best players were not very good on Saturday. Some of that was due to Penn State's players being better, and some of it was just simply bad play. But on the other side of the ball with Andy Kotelnicki, a first chance to see him calling the game from the press box. What were your initial thoughts? And I know that obviously the easy thing to do here, T. Frank, is just go to the Venga Ione motion and say that's Andy Kotelnicki's creativity. But there's a lot more, I think, that went into this game for him.
Yeah, I've broken a lot of these plays down. This is kind of why I wanted to talk about this, of just like, you can go check out the Twitter at Thomas Frank Carr. You can see some of the plays I posted there, but also we have a film study where I break down almost every single play, and I go through all these play designs on the Blue White Illustrated message board. I put them in an article that came out, that's coming out later today, I think it is, or maybe tomorrow, with a bunch of these different play designs, and they're just, like the one I put out last night on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. It was just outside zone. It was what they ran last year, but the intentionality with where on the field they ran it and how they ran it created an opportunity for an explosive play because you're putting the defense at a disadvantage. And there's just all these little wrinkles in the play that, I break down one play, Nick Singleton's touchdown run, and I break out one part of that play of it brings the corner into the blocking scheme, and you get all these great blocks from the pull blockers, and Tyler Warren gets enough of the safety, and then he's off to the races. And then other people are pointing out a part of the play where it's like, also they got the Mike linebacker into the field because of that motion. So not only did you put a player that's not good at run defense into the box, you took the best one out.
Right.
And I'm like, dang it, why didn't I notice that? Why didn't I put that in my... So there's just all these little wrinkles on basic run plays. And when he talked about the Blizzard analogy and it's all the same stuff, just blended all together, that's what you saw. And so to see it and to watch it play out, I thought was good. Like, it was fun. It was a really interesting thing. The Bo Prabula package felt a little overbaked. But at the same time, when you went in and you looked at some of the actual execution of it, it came down to Bo not making the right read. And not necessarily on the keep or the give on the option plays, but the right run read, where I think he fumbled the ball on that first play, and then he was a little gun shy to run up the gut. But if you're going to run quarterback power, which means the play is designed for the quarterback to run through the A gap, the quarterback has to be willing to run through the A gap. Otherwise, don't run it. And I just think Bo needs to... That's just a week one thing. He'll get better at that. We've seen him be very good in those situations. So just overall, it was fun to watch Andy Kotelnicki's offense.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And Penn State fans, I think, are going to see a lot more creativity and different ways to use guys than what we saw a year ago. Will that include Bo Prabula? Of course it will. I agree with you. They put a lot of stuff on tape, and that was great. But it did feel a little. Yeah. It did feel a little much. Yeah, but we'll see. It's funny though. Go ahead.
No, I just you go, and then I'll follow up with a quick point.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, Rob, that the Bo package needs game reps for sure. And they didn't get him game reps last year, which was a problem. This felt like the other extreme. So that's all. Yeah. That's all I was going to say.
So the only one that I really had a problem with was you're on the road. You've got Drew Aller in the slot, essentially. Like, he's lined up sort of in the backfield, sort of in a wing formation, and he's running the snap count with Nick Singleton under center.
That was a bit much. Yeah.
On the road,
that was a bit much, yes.
With a double count, like with a 2-clap count, everyone but the center, who's got guards and defensive tackles around his helmet, everyone else heard the clap except for the center. That was the one where I was like, you have now pushed it far enough that doesn't make any sense to me. But that's like one thing. And if they just wanted to practice that and they felt confident, like I don't have a problem with this. By far, Andy Kotelnicki is far beyond criticism for his performance in week one. But that was just the one where I was like, okay, we found the line, in my opinion.
Yes, no doubt about that. All right, T. Frank, we're coming down the home stretch here. Yep. Let's get to some standout players from the week that was. I think we will lead off the bidding here with KJ Winston, it looks like, or Jalen Reed. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got my notes mixed up here. Both of them. Honestly, we could either one of them would be okay.
Yeah, no, so they're not in the correct order on the rundown, so that's fine. Jalen Reed was the player of the game, and I'm glad you mentioned that he's up for an award. He was the most well-rounded overall player who made plays in the passing game, the run game, and honestly, between the two, and I'm not trying to be critical here, KJ Winston busted a couple coverages where Jalen Reed did not. So if we're talking about the best safety on the field who didn't make any mistakes, that would be Jalen Reed, and he had an impact on another level in that game, even if he didn't have all of those tackles. KJ Winston, the run defender, was elite. So both of those guys were excellent. There's just a couple of things that they got lucky or they got away with in terms of KJ didn't run with his guy a couple of times, but the pressure got there and it didn't matter. So what I wanted here was to kind of highlight the guys that are non-obvious in the rundown of players that you all saw, and then also to throw in some of the guys and some of the context around the good play from the players that stood out. So Jalen Reed, all around, excellent game. That is what you want from your line position. And from the safeties in general in this defense, that's going to what makes this defense be very, very good.
No doubt about it. Another guy, as you mentioned, getting away from maybe the box four and getting into a little bit more of the nitty gritty is Tyler Warren, not the pass catcher, T. Frank, the run blocker.
So James Franklin called him the most well-rounded tight end in America before the game. And James has made some of these demonstrative out loud claims for his tight ends previously. And you can always hype up a couple good plays. Like Theo Johnson's run blocking highlight reel consists of a couple of plays that are played over and over again. No, Tyler Warren was legitimately got better from last year and took a 285-pound, 290-pound defensive end for a ride on a couple of plays. He took Sean Martin and drove him out of some of those plays. Right. There's still areas for him to develop. He's not George Kittle, but he is the most well-rounded tight end. After one game, I'm confident seeing the body of work of how he got better last year as the season went on. He's that dude. He can be that dude that causes problems in the run and the pass game. So that was a great first step for him to take Power 5 opponents, defensive linemen specifically, and win those matchups, and he did. But they weren't necessarily highlighted, and you don't if he has one or two catches, he obviously has the touchdown, but he didn't have any broken tackles. He didn't run a dude over, so he doesn't get the same love that he deserves, because he definitely took a step as a run blocker.
Abdul Carter, the run defender, his first game at defensive end, marred by penalties. Obviously, that was the big memory point, I think, for many people, myself included. I also think he was more disruptive than what the stat sheet shows, just one tackle.
Absolutely, and that's the point here, is that the sacks are one thing, the pressure is another, but I was not expecting him to be a well-rounded player out of the box, because he's coming to a new position to understand how to set the edge, leverage, all of those things. He's obviously an excellent talent, and he did do some things from an edge defender perspective and from a blowing up the run perspective at linebacker, but it was not playing the edge the way he did. And he blew up a couple of runs because he was aggressive, got upfield, and was tenacious against a very good left tackle. So I thought his overall game was very good from what I wasn't expecting from him. The penalties and the kind of getting, I think, a little too amped to show West Virginia not to mess with him, that got he lost control a little bit. And James Franklin talked about that on Monday. That needs to get better, but from a play level perspective, very good football player and more well-rounded than I was expecting, even as a pass rusher, where he had a couple of moves, used his hands well.
What impressed you about Penn State's two new corners, A.J. Harris, Jalen Kimber, in their Penn State debut as starters, which I'm not sure I would have pegged both of them to start when preseason camp began. One of them, yes. Both, I'm not sure about that, but both impressed and started on Saturday.
Sticky man coverage and aggressive with the ball in the air, and they hit, especially A.J. Harris. He hits like a safety. There was one play where he almost got a targeting penalty, honestly, but his ability they forced incompletions with attacking the player and knocking the ball out because they hit so violently, and he hit like that. So the coverage from Kimber, more aggressiveness, more confidence, more physicality, and then A.J. Harris, kind of the same thing.
All right, and then I think the last guys we got to get to here: Drew Aller, the decision maker; Anthony Donko, Sal Wormley, Vega Ione, the run blockers.
Yeah, so Drew Aller, I think there's some. I tend to give him a lot of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to some of his ball placement, where everyone just sees that's inaccuracy. But there is a conversation about was it intentionally leading a receiver one way or the other? The throw to Amari Evans, not a good throw. But then the completion to Trey Wallace to start the game, where Trey Wallace has to fall over in that, the coverage dictates that he throws to a certain point, and I want to know, was he trying to lead him upfield into more yards after the catch? But generally, his decision-making of when to pull the ball down and run when there wasn't anything, and the decisive and conviction that he had was great. So the decision-maker was exceptional. And then guys that are not going to get a lot of attention because guards don't get a lot of attention, Vega and Sal. I had some questions of, if you've just been a good guard your whole career, does another year change anything? And Sal Wormley came out and was physically dominant in a lot of situations, but also the guy they took some reps off because he is a veteran. Venga played more aggressive and confident and anticipated better this year, so his athleticism started to show up. So those guys, great. And then Anthony Donko blew some dudes up. So Donko and Wormley, or Donko and Ioane, when they have those guys next to each other, when they move him over to the right side, that is a dominant run-blocking combination. So you should feel very good about that, where against West Virginia, it's dominant. Against Ohio State or USC, they'll still be able to, I think, from the strength perspective and technique and execution perspective, they'll still be able to make plays there to get Singleton, maybe not a paved lane for a touchdown, but a good chunk run in the future. All of the run blocking stuff really, I think, was a very encouraging sign, despite the fact that people want to be concerned that not every single run went for 7 yards. Right. That's not how running the football works. You're going to have some plays that are 2 and 3 yards, and how you go about blocking those up, I thought overall the 5 offensive linemen did a decent job with those guys standing out as standout run blockers.
We're in the final minutes of the BWI Live Show for September 4th. T. Frank, any final thoughts? Just a reminder to everyone, you can join Blue White Illustrated at bluewhiteillustrated.com. It is $1 for 2 months of access using the code. I'm going to find it, I promise. It is PSU1. I'm going to flash it up on the screen there. PSU1. It is $1 for 2 months of access to Blue White Illustrated at bluewhiteillustrated.com. T. Frank, final thought, and please remember to come back and visit us for the James Franklin News Conference later tonight, and also the recruiting show with Ryan and Sean and T. Frank tomorrow.
Yeah, we just got great stuff coming from everybody over at the site. So check out what we're going to write about practice tonight, our observations. We have a thread on the message board where we see stuff, we put it on the message board, and it's as if you're there with us, as best we can do to describe, while also typing onto our phone and trying to do 2 things at once. I'm not good at that. Nate and Fitz are much better at those things than I am. But we all are chipping in and giving our observations. We had so many questions in the mailbag yesterday that we didn't get to most of them because, as you see, we're over an hour, and we there's a lot to talk about this week. So we're doing a separate mailbag article coming out, I think, today or tomorrow, answering some of your questions. So if you didn't get your question on the show yesterday and you're bummed out about that, we got the mailbag coming up so we can answer a lot of those questions as well.
Awesome. Well, that's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. It is another edition of BWI Live in the books. Stay with us at bluewhiteillustrated.com for the latest on Penn State football, and we will talk to you later next week. Well, you and I will talk next week, and then T. Frank will be back tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.